Welcome to the SIWIKE podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The SIWIKE podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
And welcome to the SIWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier podcast. We are here with one of our new guest hosts, Dustin Heywood, who is also known as the EvilMog, and we will get into a little bit on his background in kind of cybersecurity and offensive penetration testing and all that good stuff. But if Dustin, you can tell us a little bit more about what you're doing now, and then we'll get into your backstory of what you were like as a kid. So Dustin, what are you up to now?
So right now I work for a little company called IBM. They're a little group called X-Force Red. X-Force Red is a group of hackers and penetration testers. I lead up the technology group for X-Force Red now. So basically what that means is I run IT operations for hackers, which have a lot of the same IT problems as regular folks, only their issues are a little more unique in cases.
Sounds good. So if we can go back in time and think about, well, what was Dustin like growing up? What was he like as a kid? Maybe your earliest, fondest memory, that sort of thing. And then how do we, we'll kind of take the journey of then all the way back up to present day. So what was Dustin like as a kid?
So Dustin as a kid was incredibly awkward. I was a nerd, bit of a geek. Oddly enough, they thought I was actually intellectually challenged and special because I couldn't handle picking up a pencil back then. Because back then, everyone was it was all based off of how well you could handwrite or print. And because my printing looked like scribbles effectively, they're like, oh, hey, this guy can't write. Let's put him in this remedial education training classes. It really just, I needed access to a computer or a typewriter at that point because computers weren't really a thing. Mom stole a telex machine from work back in the day, so I could only type in uppercase. So I was typing all my reports in uppercase to get through, and all of a sudden school started becoming easy. Oddly enough, though, I didn't get into IT until my mid-20s. I started off actually working manual labor jobs, everything from pizza delivery to packing potato chips in a chip plant. And that's actually how I got into IT. I dislocated my shoulder packing potato chips. I was couldn't really do anything at the time. I was actually a reservist in the Canadian Forces teaching kids how to fly gliders. And I was due to go join the military to become a comm research operator, but that shoulder dislocation completely wiped out any plans of going full reg force. So I got put on employee insurance, EI, and they had an option for retraining people who needed additional education. So I went to State Polytechnic to do a 6-month network tech course. Basically, the first year of their 2-year program combined down into 6 months. Somehow wound up working small IT shops, wound up at IBM briefly for about 7-8 months. Then I decided to go take a job in Afghanistan hooking up comm towers. So I went over to Afghanistan in 2009, 2008, around that time frame. Worked in the desert for a good solid year. Came back after, some interesting stories for another time, and I was looking for another job. Found a government-owned bank that was looking for IT security folks. And so I went and I applied, figuring I had absolutely no experience doing IT security, even though I've been kind of hacking as a kid and as a teenager, messing around and everything else. Went in for the interview and I'm like, hey, by the way, I've got no actual IT experience other than no actual IT security experience other than practical, in Afghanistan, getting shot at, hooking up firewalls, running network cables and everything else. And I was going up against somebody with a master's degree and all the school education, but no actual practical experience. And somehow I won out. It just worked out that my particular skill set of being able to hook up firewalls under pressure, deal with IT problems when stuff's literally on fire, intrigued the hiring manager, and I got brought on as a security analyst. From there, I wound up doing a little bit of, online education myself, did the offensive security certified professional, taught myself how to hack. And then I wound up doing hacking for the bank. Went to a couple of security conferences and thus started this 8-9 year career of information security research that led me to where I am today.
That's amazing. So a lot of amazing stories and stuff to unpack. And for those detailed ones in Afghanistan, that's probably a different episode. But yeah, I'd love if we went back earlier. So that awkward kid couldn't write. So walk us through a little bit about kind of that experience. So for those of us who are a little bit more, let's call it academically challenged, and not necessarily because we're not smart or anything. It's just that the system sometimes doesn't necessarily allow us to thrive in that setting. Walk us through a little bit about what's going on in your head. So like, did you think you were dumb or not?
No, well,
smart
I
at
thought I
first,
was
or like
dumb,
how
but same token, like I was reading grade 10 books like left, right, and center. I was doing math in my head that was, scaring teachers. It just took about, I want to say kindergarten, grade 1-ish to convince them that I actually didn't belong in the special ed class and I could actually go back into regular schooling. And then it led to, like, I think the thing I hated about it back then was because computers weren't, a thing, or even typewriters were a thing.
Sure.
My remedial training was spending 4 hours trying to grip a pencil handwriting. Well, I found out later on as I growing up that one of the common features in the autism spectrum people, or back then it was called Asperger's syndrome, is poor hand dexterity. Like to this day, I still can't pick up a soldering iron. So the education in Alberta and BC wasn't really adjusted towards really gifted people that just can't pick up a pencil. So it was frustrating. And then back then, computer nerds were bullied and picked on heavily in school because they weren't exactly cool, right? If you were smart computers, you're liable to have footballs thrown at your head by the football team. So high school wasn't exactly the most friendly of times for me. And I honestly wish that we had some level of like level of support we have today back then, as I probably would have had a far better youth / young adulthood, knowing that there was support out there. Like I didn't get diagnosed with Asperger's until I was 17.
Okay. And walk us through a little bit about kind of that high school experience. So as you mentioned, kind of the stereotypical computer science nerd and being picked on by the football players or the sports team or whatever it is there. But you kept at it. So what was kind of the evenings like? How did you learn? How did you grow? And what was kind of in and out of the curriculum? And how do you kind of like keep that mental fortitude to just get great at what you wanted to do?
Well, I spent a lot of time in the library. I mean, when books were like a new OS would come out, like Mac System 7, for example, and here I was 10 or 11 years old, I'd run down to the library, do an interlibrary loan, get one library to ship over the big book on the manual, read it cover to cover, and start, working with the school computer lab stuff. I eventually got my own PC at 12, 13 or so back in the early Pentiums. And then I got the Windows internals books and started pouring through those and started programming. I actually got banned from computers in grade 10 for the entire school year. But I had to complete Computer Science 30 on pencil and paper because I was messing with the Nobel network at the time and causing some problems for the school sysadmin. So I wish back then someone sat me down and said, look, there's fun and then there's boring, and being banned from the computers or potential criminal charges later on. Thankfully, I never got nailed with that. But those are boring versus being allowed to do cool sysadmin stuff is fun. So I wish they would have had some kind of a guidance back then for the wayward souls like us who just wanted to go play around.
That's awesome. So there's always an interest there, it sounds like. So where did that come from? Was that kind of a natural like gravitation? Did you have some influences, like people around you that also were kind of the computer, the hacker types?
No, it was mostly because I could finally handwrite. Like I could actually communicate really fast. I was typing 40, 50 words per minute. So it was just a natural place where I could fit in and socialize, as opposed to, like we had chat rooms, we had multi-user dungeons for text-based games. We had all those early online communities. Back then, it was just a way of communicating that didn't involve, trying to grip a pencil and type, because oddly enough, or the handwrite, because all that typing works out well for me.
Right. And if you were to kind of share some of your experiences, so again, kind of like being bullied and picked on for the folks that are in areas that aren't cool or whatever, like what sort of guidance or advice might you have for yourself back then? Because it seems like that you kind of kept to yourself, and I have tons of manuals and things to look at. But were you like immune to those kind of societal pressures and expectations?
Oh, no, I hated, like, being bullied was one of the worst things out there. And it's just, it gets better, right? I mean, and that's the thing. Everyone goes through that phase, or at least I went through that phase. And people kept telling me, hey, when you get into your 20s enter the adult world, the people who are bullying you will probably be flipping burgers, and you'll probably be working at some multinational corporation doing something really cool.
Sure.
Well, I looked back through my yearbook, and a bunch of them still are flipping burgers or doing other manual labor jobs, and I am where I am now. So sometime around my early 20s, I kind of went to a music festival once, and I just learned how to let go. I was wound tighter than a drum up until my, just from all the years of going through stuff. And I learned how to relax. I mean, met some cool people in college. They were all nice and friendly. And then I just learned to, live in the moment a little bit. I don't know, something just clicked.
And if you go back to that point, can you kind of pinpoint what it was, or was there a specific moment? I'm always curious about when like those epiphany type moments or those clicking moments. Is there something that you can actually go back and recognize?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, basically, I'd already dislocated my shoulder. I'd been kind of off work for a little bit. School was about getting ready to start for my second run through school. I mean, first run through college, obviously. And I realized, hey, this is a chance to just readjust how I'm doing things. It was a nice sunny day. The epiphany just sort of hit. I must have been about 23-ish. Nothing really else was going on. Friends like, hey, come down to the bar. Let's go for a beer. I guarantee you by like the end of the weekend, you'll see things right as rain. And I don't know, it was a great day and things clicked.
Okay, so it was just one of those kind of serendipitous moments where folks help you. So I'm just trying to find out if there's a way for folks to kind of cultivate and grow to that point. So if we kind of walk through high school, I mean, bullying happens, you'll get through it, and like you said, chances are you'll be in a better shape, maybe the boss of someone that was picking on you before. What was the choice for school, right? So you mentioned you did like kind of second run. How did the first decision get made, and like, was that useful, or what would you have done differently on that side? But how did kind of that progression from high school to college take place?
So high school, I wound up going through that same trap a lot of smart people go through, in that they get really smart in some classes, then they stop trying and they start skipping classes just because they're like, this is, not my thing. I wound up failing Math 30, Math 31, low marks in chem, physics, the whole 9 yards. And it cost me a lot of time to get back into college to go regain those classes back. So the only advice I can give to the smart kids out there, just because you're smart, things come easy, the difficulty level will ramp up. And I strongly regret not learning how to work when I was in high school.
Okay. And what sort of work practices would you kind of instill upon yourself if young Dustin was actually willing to listen?
Yeah, if young Dustin was willing to listen, I'd learn how to study. I mean, back then I didn't have to study at all. I'd be the kind of person who would skip all the classes, show up late for the exam, finish it in 20 minutes, get 90% of the exam, walk out, and kind of leave. It infuriated my teachers to no end. But I didn't like doing the homework because it was the same old thing I'd learned in class, and class kind of bored me. And so I didn't learn the art of sitting through stuff that absolutely bores you to go hammer out. And that really stunted me up, even when I got my new job here in my current professional role, because when we're not used to writing reports, they become such a chore. Like learning to love writing, or at least get into a groove on writing and get punched through that, hey, I've got this massive report due. We have the saying in the industry that the hacking is free, the report's what costs money.
Okay.
So I wish I'd learned that art of, I've got it down now, but it took a lot of hard hours of practice.
Sounds good. So yeah, definitely share the same sentiment, where high school was a little bit easier, or I guess maybe more relaxed and doesn't seem to be as much on the line. But then as you go to kind of college, university level, the difficulty level does indeed ramp up, right? Where you have to, and maybe not even ramp up, but also you have to study in different ways, because a lot of high school is kind of rote memorization. It's just all that sort of stuff. But then in college, university, it's more kind of the application and like different instances and stuff like that. So walk us through kind of the college experience. So
I loved college.
Oh, okay.
Loved college. College is very much everything about being, fully applicable. Here is this, go learn it, do it. I'd already learned most of the prerequisites. I was mostly in there for the certification. So like my first couple of classes, I was getting 90%, 100% in a couple of the Linux classes. I kicked out of Linux 1 because they hauled in an instructor who started trying to teach Linux. But then he moved on to talking about the Free Software Foundation and ranting about Richard Stallman and the more about the politics of free software as opposed to actually teaching how to use Unix. So I stood up in class and said, hey, are you just teach us how to use Unix, or are you going to go keep ranting about the philosophy? He's like, you've done this before, haven't you? I'm like, maybe. So I got kicked out of the class, told to write the exam, got 90% of the exam, and that was my mark for the class. So I got to sit out for 2 weeks doing nothing. But it's just one of those. Yeah, so college was entertaining. The group work took me a little bit to get into, learning the teamwork of things. I'm glad I learned that bit. But college was actually some of the funnest times I had. I finished my course off extremely quick. So.
And you talked about group work and learning that and getting used to that. So what was the process like in that, right? Because in high school, you might have a few projects, but probably not very many. But generally in college, university, there's a lot more of that. So what was the process for you to get better at group work?
Yeah, my problem with group work was I wound up doing most of the work myself. I was terrible at delegating because I already had an answer. What finally reset things for me is because I was so good at stuff, we had this final project where we were a mock company responding to an RFP.
Okay.
So they posted this RFP, we had to go reply to it. Somehow they made me CEO. So I spent more time doing paperwork than I did the tech stuff.
Okay.
And then people kept yelling at me for not doing all the tech stuff. I'm like, hey, look, here's all your paperwork you guys were doing. I'm reassigning this firewall. I learned how to redelegate appropriately, and then the project came forward. But the first couple of days, I was like trying to do all the tech work and the business work at the same time, and it just wasn't working.
Sure. So it was kind of identifying that people have different strengths and all that. When you take everything, then, well, a lot of the stuff that you're good at naturally doesn't get done. So you might as well delegate, give it to other folks, and then, hey, all the stuff that you're good at, it becomes kind of a little bit more natural. So you mentioned that you had a couple of swings in college and stuff, or different sort of certification programs. So what was that process like? And then what was the process like to get into the workforce? So you mentioned you started in like just kind of labor type jobs, but what was the transition like between kind of the next program and onwards?
Yeah, so during school, what we did was I did one of those courses where I did like your MCSA, your Linux Plus, your CCNA, a few other general IT related certs. Yep. So I wrote all my certification exams while I was still actually going through the courses. I mean, I wrote the Cisco exam while I was still in the middle of Cisco 3 because I'd read the books ahead and already got certified by the time we'd had our final exam. So that was good. The MCSA wasn't that bad either. The only one that threw me off is I think I was going right as Vista was coming out. I had to do my MCITP Vista to renew one of my certs one day. That was hard. But we had at the end of the program, they had a practicum they put you in, and I actually skipped my practicum. I was sent off to go work at one of those little IT shops doing like desktop imaging or something for one of the big four, consulting, whatever firms. I said, heck with that. I had a decent offer to go work for a little IT company that I went to work for, didn't like. Then I got another offer while I was working at this little IT company to come work for IBM. So it was just, he's already had all the certifications in place. I was basically already qualified. Once I got there, I was talking to some folks. We were working on a three weeks of days from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. and then 3 weeks of nights, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. You do like a 3 days on, 4 day off, 4 day on, 3 day off kind of rotating schedule. I wound up volunteering to go work the night shifts because we had someone I was working with that just couldn't handle the nights. Awesome as a day person. So I said, look, I'll take all your night shifts. You can take my day shifts. We'll make this whole thing work out. So I was on 7 weeks of nights, 3 weeks of days, which exposed me to all sorts of IT problems. Because oddly enough, even though the change windows are usually open during the day, a lot of them are usually only open during the night. And then working multinational, rotating shifts, I got exposed to a lot of problems. And I developed an ability to fix AAA problems or authentication, authorization, and accounting with like TACACS and Radius. So I wound up getting assigned to firewall accounts as well as just routers, which started getting me the security training, which was valuable in the industry. So, the thing That's something I would definitely do again, is volunteering for either extra credit or extra work or different engagements. Because as a level 1 analyst, you'll never touch anything. You won't even get read write. But the second you get into level 2 work at night and you're on changes, they elevate your access pretty quick. And then by volunteering to do things, you wind up getting exposure that you never normally would get.
That's awesome. So sounds like putting up your hand and requesting, even though it's not kind of the most convenient thing to do, because working nights is a little different than most people. What was kind of life like there? Because everybody who might kind of go out in the evening, well, you're working, right? And everybody's you want to go out in the afternoon, but everyone's working. So
it was actually kind of handy because I was still in my mid-20s, so I could go to. I had a couple of after-hours clubs in Calgary, so I'd go out and party. Like, we'd get off work. Some of the clubs are still running till 10 a.m. because they'd get off, or they'd run from like a 1 a.m. till 10 a.m. routine for the after hours. I mean, the problem is they don't serve alcohol, but the music is great and it's entertaining watching all the sketched out people partying at you coming out of the bar at 10 a.m. on a Sunday morning while you're just getting off work and partying with them for the last 4 hours. It made things entertaining, so it wasn't that bad per se. I did that for a bit, and then I had another opportunity come across my way, contracting. So I only stayed on that for about 7 to 9 months or so ish before I got the offer to go replace every router and switch in every large big box retailer in Western Canada. So I was like, hey, we're a US company, we're swapping out all these switches, we need local contractors, here's a decent amount, you're driving all across Alberta and BC. And so I had my wife, who was my best friend at the time, be my driver while we drove around BC swapping out routers and switches. We weren't even dating at the time, so I hired her off. She was retiring as a massage therapist, needed some spare work. So I'm like, hey, I've got this contract, let's go run my little crappy company. So did that for a bit, and then when that finished, I got the Afghanistan offer and went to Afghanistan.
Cool. And on the contracting side, was it a pretty easy decision to do that? Like, did you always think about contracting? Because I know some people have a challenge when going from kind of full-time to contract because, well, there's no security in there and all that sort of stuff. So what was the decisioning or the thinking process around that?
I mean, I was still living in my parents' basement at the time, so if I failed, it didn't really matter if I was in between contracts for more than a little bit. I had 6 months living expenses in my account at all times. So I mean, if I was short, okay, big deal. It didn't really factor much in my decision. Nowadays, I'm full-time and I refuse to do contracts. So it's all up to an individual personal preference.
Yeah, sounds good. So it sounds like that a lot that helped was a little bit of that kind of risk mitigation factors, right? So you had savings there, and obviously you could just continue living with your parents. That's not a huge deal, that sort of thing. So that kind of give you kind of a little bit more of that peace of mind that, hey, if things kind of go the wrong way, then you can always recover from that. So talk to us a little bit about Afghanistan. So that offer, like, does it just come out of left field, or was there kind of like an incubation?
I've been kind of eyeing the local job boards for contracts, and I'd seen this little place by this company come up a couple of times. So I was working as a defense contractor for the group that had the contract to manage the morale, voice, and internet services for the Canadian Forces. So the system was called Global Connect, and basically every time a soldier or their family called their families back home, it was on this system. My particular job was I managed Kandahar Airfield, as well as the region, or as well as all the surrounding forward operating bases. So I had 5 forward operating bases and a handful of police sub-service stations I had to go out and service. So you either take helicopter or you take ground transport to get out there, you do your repair, make sure everything's functioning, you come on back. I was told, hey, look, you may not have the satellite experience, but you've got the network experience. We're going to send over a guy who just released from the Canadian Forces. He's the foreman of the Joint Signals Regiment. He'll be your satellite guy and boss on the field. You just do your IT ninja stuff and make sure everything works. And it wasn't bad. I mean, it was hot, it was cold, it was rainy, the environmental conditions out there were pretty gnarly. I mean, there's this dust, it's almost like moon dust. It gets in everything. So unless you're taking, it's like this really gritty, like fine sandpaper, like dust that just destroys everything. So you're constantly taking an air compressor to devices. And we had this little cyber cafe out there for people do some mild gaming and stuff like that. Trying to keep video cards working in Afghanistan heat with this dust was just a nightmare. And then you deal with phone calls trying to maintain decent voice with 200 milliseconds of jitters. So, and like, let's call it 1,300 milliseconds response time. So there's about a second and a half delay between when I say something and when, my lips move to go along with it and back. So it's like almost talking in walkie talkies. It's like simplex communication.
Yep.
The isolation was pretty gnarly, but I was home, every 3 months for 2 weeks and then fly back out there again. And then when my rotation was done, that was it. Best thing I ever did in my life, and I got a medal out of it. So
that's amazing. So talk to us a little bit about like kind of that first deployment project or whatever you call it. So were you scared, excited, about a bit of both, or some other emotions? Like,
I was fairly excited and a bit of scared. I had to release from the reserves completely in order to get out there. They didn't want a reservist out that's not actually on the combat mission in country. So I had to release from that. Make sure everything was all clocked out. My parents were so freaked out it wasn't even funny. Writing my will at 26 or so was a bit weird. I'm not going to lie. That was the most bizarre thing. And then, of course, having to sit through by the way, there is no life insurance for this, or there's no insurance for that. And here's all the scary stuff. Here's your payout in the event, anything weird happens. The security training, showing up for like 9 vaccination shots in one day and then going back like 3 months later for another full round of vaccinations was kind of bizarre. I got sick my first 3 weeks over there. Apparently everybody does. There's this thing called the Kandahar crud where it takes everybody out within the first couple of weeks, and then after that you're typically good. It's like a nasty flu almost.
Okay.
But once you get over that, it wasn't bad. The heat was what killed me. I showed up, it was cold and rainy. Actually, I flew into Dubai first, then flew into Afghanistan, so it was hot. Then it flew in because it was winter monsoon season in Kandahar, so it was raining so bad my first couple of months. And then the heat, like in the summer, was plus 65 Celsius on the tarmac. Like it was brutal hot.
Wow.
But nothing beats an iced cappuccino in the middle of the desert. Because we had a Tim Hortons out there, so.
Okay. A little bit of home out there.
Yeah, exactly. But the weird IT issues you deal with when you're out there are just, I'm so glad I had some experience doing some field deployments at, like the other big box retailers and dealing with the stuff working in a knock before I went over. But if anything went wrong, you had no support. Like you were the guy who had to sort it out, and that was it. And when things break, they break spectacularly out there.
Right. Can you tell us a story about one of those spectacular breakages that really caused some grief for you?
No, but I can give you through an interesting story that we blamed a network outage that happened every single day for about a week on what we thought was electronic warfare jamming, which typically happens. Like they have these jammers that jam the bombs, do all their things, and so we were thinking that was taking out our satellite. Well, I decided to go take a look outside one day during this outage, and it happened to be roughly, let's call it 9-10 in the morning, and lo and behold, there's this giant ball of plasma in the path of my satellite, blocking all the RF. So really, it was just the sun that was stopping us. But we were for weeks on the ticket blaming it on enemy RF. Solar transit finished. All of a sudden, our comms came back online, and everyone was happy. But it was the most frustrating couple of weeks we were dealing with.
Yeah, it sounds like the enemy has a leg up on you, and you realize, oh, it's just Mother Nature and the sun.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that was a funny one. I think the coolest thing we did, though, is we discovered we had a bunch of extra satellite bandwidth on our download frequencies, just due to the way we did our traffic engineering. So we were able to pipe in the Stanley Cup playoffs over satellite into Afghanistan, and that made everyone's day.
Yeah, definitely. When you can kind of normalize things with the entertainment back home, that definitely helps.
Exactly.
But what was the process to kind of put Afghanistan like on hold and be finished with it? Right? Was it kind of like the end of the contract, and then you just didn't renew, that sort of thing, or were there other factors at play?
Normally when you go in there, you only go over for a 6-month contract. I renewed my contract 6 months in for an extra 6 months, and then we had some interesting issues. My convoy, or my last couple of convoys, kept getting bumped. Well, they weren't really bumped per se, but we had issues en route that resulted in a number of folks being rather scared. And so after a number of incident reports, they're like, look, man, you're bad luck. We're going to rotate you home, pay out your contract, rotate in somebody else and call it a day. You've done your time, enjoy. And I mean, I'm glad it ended that way because, there's so many other ways that could have ended.
Sure.
And they were really good about it because they like, hey, look, this other company, we've got a program where we find people the placement program to get them jobs after they leave. And so, that's why I was constantly looking on the job boards. It was this placement program. It's like, hey, why don't you apply for security jobs? I'm like, well, I'm not really a security person. I'm a network guy. They're like, dude, you've done firewalls, you've done like all these things. You are more than qualified. Just because you don't have the title doesn't mean you're not a security person. And that's, kind of how I got into the field that way.
Nice. So tell us a little bit more about kind of that detail process. So you now back home because you don't have to go back. And did you have something waiting for you, or did you have to go through like
no,
application?
I had to go through a process.
Yeah.
So I came home. I had to go talk to the job placement, or it wasn't even job placement, it was employee career counseling and transition assistance kind of program. Mm-hmm. And we sat through, talked through what I was good at, etc. I was applying for jobs at the time. Nothing really decent was popping up. And then lo and behold, this position for my last company I was at pops up, and I'm like, let's go apply for this. And, their recruitment process was so slow. It took a month just for me to get the interview and another month to find out I even got the job. But you know what? I wasn't really interested in working anyways. I was thoroughly happily retired. And people say, no, you were unemployed. I'm like, well, there's only one difference between unemployed and being retired. That's the amount of beer in your fridge. And a very wise person once told me that, my father.
Nice. So it sounds like that, you came out of retirement.
Yeah, I came out of retirement to go into security, and I just said yes to every stretch possibility was there. And well, I also learned a bunch of things, like I dealt with data center fires, data center floods, data center migrations, SAP migrations. Like I was through the thick of virtually everything by the time I said, all right, I need to calm down and get down to a 40-hour work week again, because those that can wind up do, and those that are doing wind up getting suckered into overtime, and that's just the nature of the beast when you're young, right?
That sounds good. So then that's when you get hired into IBM as part of.
Well, I got hired into ATB first. What
ATB
happened
first.
was, right? I got hired into ATB, sat there for eight years, and then IBM actually picked me up at a security conference. So I got into the security conferences I was actually going for my OSCP at the time, and someone was like, hey, there's this conference called DerbyCon down in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm like, DerbyCon? Like, yeah, it's 1,000 people. You'll be perfect for you, right? Rather than this 50,000 or 30,000 DEF CON conference. Right. So I show up, and I felt so at home, it wasn't even funny. Like there's this mentality at DerbyCon that there are no rock stars, and anybody there would sit down and show you, hey, here's how we do this, or here's how we do that, or here's the CTF, come help me out. Like there was none of this ego at this conference, and it just grew. And after going there for years, I wound up speaking there, helping run the conference, like helping run their Wi-Fi and other things. And so I became kind of a fixture at this conference. And I was, at the end of an event after doing Hacker Jeopardy, when I ran into a recruiter for X-Force Red when they were picking people up. And I'm like, hey, I'm looking to go jump out. This is back in like September or so timeframe of 2016. And he's like, yeah, well, we're looking to go higher up. Give us a shout when you're ready to jump. And then I wound up working, well, what happened was we fired our blue team manager, and I was the red team manager at the time. So I wound up doing his job and my job, along with doing a full-time analyst role on each side. And I was just burnt out. I had a stress-induced panic attack during a blue coat migration that felt like a heart attack, honestly. I woke up in the emergency room, and that was my wake-up call that working 90 plus hours a week is not exactly good for you. So I went on stress leave, and they kept calling me out during my leave. So I called up IBM's like, hey, look, I need out of here. You guys still hiring? We started the interview process. And then I gave my employer, because I'd been there for so long, 2 months notice that I'm out of here. You guys have a whole bunch of stuff to transition. Did my 2 months piece, got out, went over to IBM, and it's been happy ever since.
Sounds good. And you mentioned a little bit about kind of DerbyCon and getting involved. Like, what was the process to get involved? Like, did you just kind of put up your hand and say, hey, I just want to speak, I want to network, I want to do all that sort of stuff? Because
I didn't even have to put up my hand. I just started doing stuff. I was at the conference and they're like, hey, we need someone to help hook up wireless. I'm like, okay, well, I've got my gear here. What do you guys got for equipment? Went down, started doing configurations, and I started helping run the CTF wireless for stuff because I was there anyways a couple of days beforehand doing training. So I'm like, yeah, I'll lend a hand here, do whatever else. I get a couple of drink tokens out of it and I'll be happy. And that just led to multiple years. I started applying to speak, got accepted to speak, started speaking there every year while I was at it. And then just somehow magically I got awarded a what they call a black badge in the industry, and that gives you free entry to the conference for life.
Right.
Now I'm just due to my support. And then when employers see things like black badges and the fact that you're involved in conferences and the fact that you're helping out, yeah, it just leads to more opportunities for you. And
for sure. I think when folks can see that other people value you, right? So with black badges or whatever sort of notoriety, I think that definitely helps. And when you're constantly around and a fixture in the places they are, then people take notice and they want you to come work for them as well. So so it sounds like that you're enjoying your time at IBM. And I want to ask like the nickname. So you go by EvilMog, and even like your LinkedIn doesn't even have Dustin. Well, I guess it does, but not the URL part of it. Like how did that come into it, and where did the name come from? And yeah.
So it was funny. My company, the company I was at before was a government-owned bank, and they didn't want me doing any research under my own name, so I had to do things under a handle. So I had to join IRC, and my gamer tag for ages was MOG, which is also, oddly enough, the first glider I ever flew, CG Mog. It's also a Final Fantasy character, and there's a few other things where it's from. But I ran into a guy named Matthew O'Gorman, who has the same initials. So we got together and like, hey, I'll let you keep MOG. I'll go with Dr. Mog or Evil Mog or a few of the other variations of Mog that I've kept around for IRC deconfliction purposes. And so I went by that up until about 2015, when in a paper, somebody released my name, my cluster size, the company I was working for, basically everything. And so I had to come out of the shadows and into the light going, yeah, okay, fine, all this stuff was me. And I started doing stuff as both my name and my handle. But when I was doing talks, all my talks go, hi, I'm redacted. I do redacted for redacted. I'm here to talk about redacted.
There you go. So it came from your original online handle, but then the evil came in because someone else had the name.
Exactly.
And put in some sort of qualifier in order to do that, and then it's based on that kind of press release, so to speak. Then you got outed, and now you are forever branded as the Evil Mog. So that's awesome. So,
and I'm totally cool with it because that was basically my resume when I applied at X-Force Red. They're like, where's your resume? I'm like, tell you what, Google me. And that was literally the resume. I mean, I had to create one for HR purposes, but the decision to hire was made well before my resume ever hit the desk.
Yeah, and that goes to the typical quote, like actions speak louder than words. When you're out there and people can Google you and then they find stuff, well, then that kind of speaks more than whatever bullet points exist on a nice piece of paper or whatever. So I think that's amazing.
Exactly. Cool. Well, and that's why I tell everyone, hey, if you're trying to get into the industry, do blog posts, even if it's just how I learned something simple that everybody also knows out there. We look for your writing style. We look for things that you're doing. We look for people to get involved in conferences. Those tend to be the doers in the industry that wind up, doing great things.
For sure. Yeah, and I definitely echo that advice. Whether or not you are the foremost expert, that's not what you're trying to share. It's how do you communicate? Can you communicate? Is probably another big thing as well. And when you're out there and confident enough to be out there, I think that speaks volumes as well. So, if you were to go back in time and give Dustin some SIWIKE, so I know we kind of peppered in a couple of them there, but if we were to kind of go back, maybe one or two. Maybe three top pieces of advice that you give yourself, what might those be?
The top three things I probably would have done is pay attention in high school, get decent high school marks, save yourself a couple of grand in re-education later. Two, go to school earlier and get the higher level certifications sooner. If I could have skipped the manual labor phase of my life and all the wear and tear it did in my body and got into security sooner, I totally would have. And number three, buy large amounts of Bitcoin back in 2009 because I had the chance to buy that stuff when it was 50 cents a piece, and I I mean, it's going to crash one of these years anyway, so I'm not encouraging anybody to ever buy any kind of investments. I'm just going to clarify that now.
Yeah.
But, if I could have back then, I probably would have.
Yeah, that's a bunch of times. There's so many times in that journey where it's like, I should buy some. Now, do it later. I should buy some. Now, do it later. I should buy some. And lo and behold, obviously, it's one of those things. But to your point, probably now is not the right time to buy.
Yeah, now is the worst time to buy. You buy low and sell high. Now it's sky high. You'll, it's only it's only worth what people think it's worth. And one of these days, it's going to crash and fall apart. But, had I known then, I may have. I lost a hard drive with 100 Bitcoins on it back in the day because we were all mining and playing with the CPU stuff. I mean, it's lost, no skin off my nose now, but I mean, dang.
Yeah, that would have been an earlier retirement, that sort of thing. So
exactly.
Speaking of that, so what are some future aspirations? What are some of the things that folks can look forward to the EvilMog being involved with, or can you even say?
I mean, I'm always looking for something new and cool to work into. I mean, I've done the offensive side of the world. Nowadays, a lot of the hotness is in the SRE work, or site reliability engineering.
Okay.
Is what they call it now. And that's basically DevSecOps or running cloud with Kubernetes. Right now, my cloud experience is basically zero, other than doing some light breaking into it. A while ago, people thought cloud was the next, or would have been just a fad, but now with things like serverless computing and multi-cloud being the new way forward, if I was to go back and had to restart school again today, I'd probably become an SRE and do cloud DevSecOps.
That's amazing. So yeah, it sounds like that there'll be more learning on the horizon for you, and who knows what'll be upcoming in the next phase of the story of the EvilMog.
Well, here's the thing: the learning never stops. I want everyone to understand that right now. I mean, I probably spend 100 to 200 hours a year in continuing education just to keep on top of things. Let's look at Windows, for example. When I started, it was Server 2003. Server 2012 just dropped yesterday. So there's a good gap in technology that changes, and it's always going to be evolving. So if you're looking for a career where you're not learning, this is not the one for you.
For sure. And I think that also applies outside of tech as well. So obviously in things like cyber and tech, it moves even quicker, but even like accountants, I'm sure they have to learn stuff, and lawyers and all that sort of stuff. There's always new innovations that are happening. But obviously some of those take longer to get into the mainstream. But thanks so much, Dustin, for sharing your insights. And would love to have you back to kind of do a deeper dive on any one of these topics. There's a lot of things that I kind of noted in terms of even on the reservist side, or like more of those stories in Afghanistan, at least the ones that are declassified enough for you to share, that sort of thing. And even some of the mindset thing, because I find there's a great energy with you in terms of like just wanting to learn and kind of that curiosity. So maybe going back and figuring out where that may or may not have come from, and what you can have done to kind of incubate that. So yeah, thanks so much, Dustin, for joining us. And where can folks connect with you if you're willing to share, or what?
Twitter is the easiest way. If you want to get hold of me on Twitter, it's evil_mog, because there is apparently an evil without the underscore, but he's got like 5 followers, and I've been trying to get him delisted for ages. So evil_mog on Twitter, or hit me up on LinkedIn, either or, EvilMog on LinkedIn. Both of those are the easiest way to get hold of me.
That's perfect. So thanks so much, Dustin, for joining us, and hopefully we'll have you back on a future episode.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us on the SIWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you found this podcast. And if you can give us a review, that would be very appreciated. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn at LukiDanu, LukiDanu, and the same on most social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.